Hello, everyone. It's April 26th. It's the blockchain team meeting. Recordings now began. Mainnet check-in. Well, last week we had the release 2.0.11.0.0. That seems to be going well. I didn't see any issues or complaints about it. I have noticed that still, just like spot checking, no one has been microblock mining yet. Maybe it's just people have to go turn that setting back on, or not sure. I can look more into it afterwards.
That's what, because the setting is not used. So yeah,
It should default to true though, I would think.
yeah.
Maybe miners just haven't upgraded. I don't know. I'll look more into it. Anything else on mainnet?
All the seeds are upgraded, as well as all of the followers for mainnet.
Cool.
So that's all complete.
Awesome. Not to mention I don't have to be dealing with the release cycles anymore. Sorry, what's up?
Yeah. Oh, I was gonna ask, should we have like some kind of mechanism for like getting an approximation of like how widely deployed a release is?
I think we should. I don't think that exists yet though. We can do it for public nodes pretty readily. All you'd have to do is just hit up v2 info and see what the version is. But for netted nodes, it's a little bit harder.
Yep.
We don't signal that in the peer-to-peer protocol, but maybe we should.
Yeah, I mean, I would say just as a first approximation, we could probably just have a script that only hits public nodes.
Yeah, we could do that. Well, something else from mainnet. Let's go through the project board. All right, now that 2.0.11 is out the door, we can take a closer look at merging these. Pavitra, I think this is ready for merge now, unless you're still waiting for something from Ludo.
No, I'm not waiting. Yeah, I can merge it today.
Awesome. Yeah, 2.0.12 is going to have a better mempool. Same with Pascal's PR. Like it's got two approvals. Aaron, I don't know if you want to take a look at it, but we can merge that as soon as. And now that 2.0.11 is in, we can merge to develop.
Yeah, I'll take a look.
Cool. So remove microblock mining from the config. I have some reservations about this because I think that we should retain the ability to have miners disable microblock mining if we find some other problems with it in the future. Open to pushback. I guess it's a measure of like how confident do we feel that that's not going to happen.
Well, currently.
Yeah, it's not used right now, but maybe we should actually make it used.
Yeah. So we're not talking about retaining. We're talking about implementing.
Yes.
Yeah. So I guess I would be in favor of implementing mine microblocks flag. So maybe we should just start an issue.
All right. Can do that.
And one thing I'd add here is that like probably we would want the mine microblocks flag, if set to false, to not only not mine microblocks yourself, but as a miner, you should also not confirm microblocks. Or maybe that should be a separate flag. I don't know. Because like if we're worried that like there's some bug and someone's producing invalid microblocks, then we would also want other nodes not to try and confirm them.
Yeah, I think it's probably best to make those separate.
Yeah. Cool.
Sounds good. I got one round of feedback from Pavitra. Thanks, Pavitra. Still waiting for eyeballs from everyone else on this. This is a slew of changes, breaking changes to the Clarity CLI binary that make it, among other things, output everything in JSON so that it makes it more machine readable, which I know is something that I think the Clarity SDK would benefit from. And it also makes it so that the boot code as well as the cost functions are instantiated in the database, so that when you launch a contract, you get your contract instantiation, your analysis, and your execution can fail due to cost overflow using either the mainnet or the testnet cost block limits. I think that there's still some sort of transient bug in the test that's not related to this PR, but I can take a look at that too. I've taken a look at this. This is Pivithra's PR. How are you doing on this, Pivithra? Is there anything else that needs to be addressed on this before Aaron or Matt gives approval?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think it just needs like another review.
All right, sounds good. Hey, Reed, are you on the call?
Yeah, I'm here.
Awesome. Do you want to talk about the status of the decoupling? I saw you had that PR merged recently.
Yeah, so I merged kind of the first, or like the initial decoupling PR. There's still more work to be done on this front, but I think this was like a pretty good first step. I'm thinking maybe the next step will be revisiting kind of it, the next ticket down in this in progress is about the message codec. I think maybe slightly changing the approach and moving some of that stuff into the new types module instead of making a totally new codec module is probably appropriate and shouldn't be too much work. So yeah, keep an eye out for that. I'll probably do that this week. What else? I'm trying to think if there's anything else to say about this.
Is the moratorium lifted on making changes to the Clarity database or the Clarity VM?
Yeah, I think we can lift that for now. I mean, I think now that this kind of initial like refactoring work has been done and we have a new Clarity VM module and the separation of concerns is like kind of in place, at least kind of theoretically, it should be easier to kind of make smaller changes, kind of working towards the ultimate goal of the complete decoupling. Yeah, this was kind of like the big one, I guess. So yeah, let's lift the moratorium.
Sounds good. Pavithra, is there there's a PR for this open, right? Event broadcast or pending microblocks?
Yep, there is.
Okay, I'm gonna put this in review in progress. So last night I went through the 2.1 work streams, and I guess this is a nice segue into the 2.1 work streams, and I turned all the work streams into issues, a bunch of issues. I can tell you right now, one of them is in progress, and that's tracking and exposing the epoch switch in the sortition database. I'm working off of Next, and we have a pretty big merge PR that's going to go into Next that brings in the 2.0.11 changes. So I'll just go ahead and send that. I can send that separately from this PR if that would make reviewing it easier, because I think it's a pretty big PR.
One thing we might want to watch out for is I think that like there's a couple things in Next that I think definitely need to be implemented somewhat differently come 2.1.
Yes, I agree. I actually have issues for them already. Do you want to go ahead and say what they are, and I'll just confirm?
Yeah, well, I think it's like there's like TX sponsor.
That. There's also, I think.
Oh yeah, the memo.
Here it is. Depending on how you want to think about it, do you think also STX transfer with memo?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think that there's a way to do that in a non-consensus breaking way. Because like, yeah, it could. I think there are some changes that need to be made there, and so I don't know if we want to start like a new Next branch or something and have those do a PR once they're in a position where they could be implemented in that way. or if that's like too much complexity and we should just like track it as we were planning to, where we just have next be 2.1 and we fix them in a later PR.
I think the latter might actually be simpler. Like, I don't
Okay.
think very much has to change with TX sponsor, for example.
Yeah.
Because like the logic behind TX sponsor doesn't have to change. It's just the programmatic interface in Clarity. Like, we've get rid of the variable and replace it with an extension contract.
Sure.
That's blocked on having the infrastructure in place to deal with extension contracts, but
Yeah.
Plumbing that
Okay.
through as an extension contract, I don't think is that much work.
Yep. Okay. That works for me.
Cool. And same with XTX transfer memo and any other modifications we want to make. That said, I'm just going to pull up separately the list of 2.1 issues, because there's a lot of them. I can pull the audience here. I can organize this into a separate project board if you'd like, or I can put it into the same project board. It doesn't really matter to me that much, just whatever y'all would find more useful. Any strong opinions? All right, guess there's no strong opinions. I'll put them into the current project board then. What I was hoping to do here is two things. We don't have to do this right now on this call, but we just want to make sure that everything that's listed here in issues is represented from the 2.1 work streams document and any supporting documents from that. I only assigned myself the issues that I already signed up for here. So the second thing I would ask is for everyone to assign themselves the issues that they want to work on. I don't think there's anything really different between the list of issues here and the set of issues here. Maybe there's just a bit more granularity on the epoch switch, but I think everything here should be covered. There was one thing I added. I'm just trying to remember what it was. Oh yeah, it's improved clarity functions for querying and converting principal types. For example, turning a principal type into its buff 20 or getting the buff 20 out of a principal type might be something useful. But other than that, I think everything here is covered. So there's no comments on that. I can just move on to discussion items. So just like, oops, don't know what I did there. So just I guess like the ask I have here is so just assign yourself issues there. So discussion item. Anyone want to take that? Anyone want to take this approach here? I'm sorry, take up this work item. Mechanism for measuring how widely deployed a release is. I mean, I can, excuse me, I can do it if no one else wants to.
There's already an issue open for this, right, Jude?
I think there's an issue related to updating the network protocol to make this easier, but I don't think there's an issue for the script that just crawls v2 infos.
Right. So this is what you're talking about is not, an actual like mechanism built into the protocol, but just kind of, crawl v2 info. And I don't think we need to maybe make an issue for this. I mean, we have several community projects. I think our first attempt should be to reach out to Talha and see if you can just update the XTS node map to do this, which should be like a pretty easy change. So I'm happy to ping him, but let's not add more work for us unless we can avoid it.
Alrighty.
Yeah. That also probably will lead to a nicer tool too. You just look at the web page.
Yeah. All right, I can ping him to do that. Then there's one more discussion item I wanted to add. So let's, I'm going to add it while we're talking through this last one.
Okay. I'm in the interest of not wasting people's time with me just calling on people and asking for what issues they want to assign to. I'm just hoping people will just do that asynchronously if that works for everyone. So do you want to just jump into that discussion item you had, Walker?
Sure. So this came up sort of through the process of, the release, watching the release of 2.0.11 unfold. At least from my vantage point, I kind of felt like because there was no sort of single person who was really in charge of making sure that 2.0.11 sort of gets out of the door in a timely manner. I think, a lot of things maybe took longer than they should have. In general, I feel like there is room to really streamline that process further. And kind of the analogy from any other large open source project is typically you'll have a dedicated release manager, who's just sort of herding the cats, making sure like things are making progress and things are unblocked. And so I wanted to propose basically designating a specific release manager for each release that we do. And to maybe, reduce the burden on any one person, maybe we can rotate that responsibility through various individuals. But first, just wanted to bring that up, see if people feel that same pain and feel this is a reasonable solution, or if there are other options to consider.
I mean, I think that sounds reasonable to me. Willing to try it out. I think that this particular release was somewhat more difficult because I know that I myself was a blocking factor on a lot of it because of the testing I wanted to do for Atlas and for the microblock mining.
And I'm not really talking about, work that had to happen, like, that work, we can't really compress it away, like that work still has to happen. I'm talking more about just communication and coordination delays, like if something is ready, then, like someone needs to tag, maybe Charlie or someone else to say, okay, like we need to deploy this. Once something has been deployed, like maybe we need to circle back in a few hours to say, well, have the notes caught up, like have we checked into this? Or, like once in a while kind of realigning on, what are the next steps to get to a release? What are the blocking factors? So it's a lot of just communication and coordination and not like, and that's where I think a lot of the lost time was. And of course, the work that we actually need to do, we can't really like skip that. So all of that work still remains. Another maybe related thing here is to make like the release process itself a little bit more rigorous. So we talked about, now we have release candidates, but we still have, somewhat sort of fuzzy a process of like what actually pushes a release candidate into, a release build, and that's not as rigorous as it could be. So that, we could sort of combine these two things in some ways. Again, having, some one person be like really driving the release process allows this to happen hopefully in a more streamlined fashion, and then we can create like a release checklist or some other kind of process that people can follow like in a repeatable manner.
Alrighty. If we're going to try to stick with a monthly cadence, then I guess the next release would be sometime toward the middle or the end of May. Is my understanding?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
All right. So I guess maybe the next question would be like, when's a good time to figure out who this person is going to be, and what types of responsibilities would they have to have? I kind of think that maybe one thing that we should probably have in place at the beginning of the release process would be to have a checklist of things that have to be all true in order for the release to happen.
Yeah, so I think like the way that I would imagine this working is like the release manager comes up with this checklist. The checklist could be based on a template, and the checklist has the property that if every item on the checklist is checked, the release is released.
I agree.
Like I think that the sort of like failure mode that we have is like we get a bunch of stuff done, and then we're like, well, there's some like additional stuff that's like maybe not captured in our checklist, and there's like uncertainty in like actually moving from, hey, we're like 95% done to actually done,
Mm-hmm.
And like the release manager, I think, is just like in charge of setting that. So I would say the checklist isn't like all the things that have to be done before the release. It's like all the things that if they are done, the release is released.
I'm not sure I understand the difference.
I think what Aaron is saying is like the latter. What he's suggesting is more resistant to scope creep. Otherwise, like the previous, it's like, all right, we completed all this stuff. What else can we add onto this list before we do a release? Oh, I see that there's 3 PRs that we could probably fit in. But what Aaron is suggesting is we're more resistant to that and saying like, okay, every item on this checklist is done. Is it safe to release? Meaning like, is there anything breaking in it? And if not, then you just release it. You don't see if there's any other low-hanging fruit to add on to this release. You just go.
Yep, understood. Yeah, that's what I was thinking would be true as well. Once this checklist is set, it doesn't grow.
Yes. Yeah. And like, I would even say that like the safety concerns are embedded in the checklist.
Yeah.
Like basically, if you checked every item off, like you're tagging the release. There's nothing else happening. Yeah. And then my like other suggestion for this is like rotating assignments make sense, but so do sort of like context specific assignments, where it's like depending on what is going on in the release, it makes sense to have different release managers. So like in 2.0.11, I think that the sort of 2 biggest items happening in it were the changes to Atlas and microblock mining. And so, you know, we would assign a release manager like based on that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense.
All right.
Yeah, the person or people whose PRs are comprise the bulk of the release should be responsible for making sure that it's release ready.
Yeah. Or if like, or like in the case of like 2.0.11, like I think that while the Atlas PR was largely Ludo's work, I think you also had like a very large like vested interest in the testing and functioning of that PR. And so I think like in that case, like either one of you would have made sense.
It might also make sense to make it so that the checklist items have individual owners.
Sure. Yeah.
So like if there's 2 different big features going in, then like person A tracks checklist item number 1, person B tracks checklist item number 2, that sort of thing.
Yes, I like that idea, Ludo. And yes, I agree with you, Jude.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, someone in the chat. Leader lecture based on number of lines changed. That's a good idea.
Yeah, it also punishes people for more lines of code.
And to be clear, at least in my mind, it's not that the release manager is in charge for doing all of the testing or even executing all of the steps in the checklist. The release manager is just the single person in charge of making sure that those things are happening. Yes. And, you know, someone has a question about, you know, when is this release or when release, you know, like the release manager should have the most up-to-date answer for that. And the other thing, and maybe this is just for the useful for the group, is I bring this up because I think Ludo mentioned in a conversation that, you know, he said that, oh, like I assumed, Diwakar, that you were the release manager. If people have, if other people have this shared assumption, it's a very dangerous assumption to make because I certainly
also had that assumption.
I certainly was not thinking of myself as a release manager and will not do a good job at it. So that's the other reason why I wanted to bring it up, just to make it sort of super explicit about, you know, who's playing this role for any given release, and just kind of name it and, you know, track it a little bit more formally.
Alrighty, cool. Happy to add that to the changelog too. Like, you know, release X was shepherded by person Y or something like that. So that way we just have a log of who did what.
Sure, yeah. All right, so I would say maybe in a week or so, we should choose who would be the release manager, or maybe in 2 weeks at most, we should choose who would be the release manager for the next release. Again, all of this is assuming that we already know there are some changes that will go to the next release, right? The mempool walk order is one of them. So we know that they will definitely be in next release. Yeah, so then I think we can assign one maybe even next week or the week after.
Sorry, Pavithra, it looks like you're currently the highest number of lines changed for this release.
Okay, I'm ready for it.
All right, is there anything else you want us to talk about before we adjourn?
Since we do have time, should we actually talk through? I think it might be useful to actually start talking about, some Stacks 2.1 items if we do have time remaining.
Sure.
Why waste it? So either if we want to spend some time going over tentative assignments for work streams, we can do that. If there are specific work streams that need more fleshing out, we can talk about those. In terms of the epoch switch, at least I don't have a good sense of, Jude, what are you working on something related to that? Aaron is also working on something related to that. Is there kind of, a plan sort of coming together? How do these big pieces fit in? I would love a discussion on that as well. So there are plenty of things I think that are useful since we have the time to potentially talk through, but I want to see if other people have an opinion and preference.
Well, I can just explain where I'm going with the epoch switch and try to characterize at least the parts that I see myself working on. Maybe we can flesh out or tease out any agreement or disagreement Aaron has.
Sure. I think, yeah, maybe as like maybe a first response to like looking at these open issues for 2.1. Like I see you have 6 things assigned, and like we can go through and assign things, but I feel pretty strongly that we should not be assigning issues that aren't getting worked on currently.
Okay.
And that we should try as much as possible to have PRs that only address one issue at a time.
I agree.
Go
ahead.
Because that's gonna help us just be like way more, I think, responsive and fungible with like people's time and work streams.
All right. The epoch switch, I kind of feel like is a story in 3 acts. The first act is making it so that the sortition database and by extension, the burn state database in the Clarity VM are aware of epochs, as in like given a Stacks block, given a Bitcoin block height, it'll tell you what epoch is currently active. Once you can do that, the second act is going through various points in the special contract call logic or in any other place where we need to have epoch specific behavior and gate access to the epoch specific features, as in like, if an epoch 2.0, then do this. If an epoch 2.1, then do that instead. And I think each of those is a separate PR. I don't think they're that big, but like if we want to do one issue, one PR, then that's what that's going to turn into. The third act in this is potentially done in parallel to the gating, or maybe even after the gating, would be making it so that we have the infrastructure in place to instantiate the new 2.1 contracts. So that would be the new POX contract, as well as the extension contracts that we intend to have. Does that all make sense from high level view?
Yeah.
And there are dependencies on those. That's basically a linear sequence of events that would happen.
Yeah, I'm not so sure that the implementations are actually all that dependent on one another. Like, I think that it's true that the actual like functioning of the gating method matters, but like it's entirely possible to stub the gating function.
Yeah, for sure. I just meant like in terms of feature completeness, not in terms of like get stuff done.
Definitely.
Yeah, very much agreed there.
Cool.
Other work stream, we have extension contracts, got lots of these. We have the POX extension contract we're going to add, as well as the new 2.1 contract. Very briefly though, just about the 2.1 upgrade. This is a conversation that Aaron and I have had that I don't know how further widely is, but I think it's worth mentioning. I closed one of the issues here last night on Stacks 2.1 about doing a data migration from the 2.0 contract to the 2.1 contract, because it would probably be a lot safer and a lot simpler if we simply made it so everyone unlocked at the epoch boundary. So what that would mean is your stacks you would have a chance as a user to relock your stacks into the 2.1 contract once the 2.1 contract goes live. You'd have like a grace period of like anywhere between a couple weeks to like a month or something like that. Reason being is that saves us a very costly state copying operation that would have to be done every time you have a stacks block mined that crosses the epoch boundary. Does that all make sense to everyone?
Yeah, I can also add like kind of like a summary of that and its consequences to the there's like a POX upgrade discussion topic.
Sounds good.
In the repo. Yeah, so I'll like throw that there.
We will want to communicate this pretty widely when the time comes, because people who are locked across the epoch boundary will still have to relock into 2.1. That said, though, there are a lot of there's a lot of work streams here, like just issues here for various types of extension contracts. The biggest ones I think are the converting between buffers, sequences, and integers, which I think is a pretty big pain point. I think that these contracts would have native implementations because they'd be basically clarity built in, so we just have the contract call interception logic use the native implementation right then and there. We would need to have those interfaces stubbed out first of all, and then we would second of all need to have someone go and implement them. And I think that this is a really parallelizable set of tasks. Like working on buffers to confirm integers can be done in parallel with string ASCII and string UTF-8 to and from integers. Oh, and I just realized there's a new issue I forgot here. We also need buff slicing. The third vein of things here are the in-band upgrades. I have myself assigned to these. I can just unassign myself for now. Those are things like vote on exit at block height and voting to extend the POX sunset. Regarding exit at block height, I didn't tag this as consensus critical because we could do this today. It would be a soft fork. We would have the nodes use a designated contract as a voting contract for exiting at block height, and once the soft fork activates, the expectation would be that nodes simply stop at that height. It would be easier if we make this consensus critical, but we don't have to. As such, it's just not tagged that way. One thing that is not covered in this workstream issue that I also want to bring attention to is the notion of gating cost functions. That's a separate but related issue to having the new cost function constants. But it will mean that we have to change the cost assessment logic to make sure that the new default cost functions get invoked across once the 2.1 epoch comes around. Right now, the code path just loads up the current contents of the .costs contract, but that will need to be changed pervasively in the code base to determine whether or not to load the .costs or the .cost-2.1 cost functions. I'm not sure how big of a change this is going to be. I'm hoping it's not very big.
Yeah, it shouldn't be that big. Yeah, a possible alternative is just that like in the new block, we just like add a new mapping to the costs. like there's a cost voting contract,
Yes.
and like we can just simulate successful votes.
Can we?
Yeah, and that way, like we wouldn't need to do a gated access, like.
So I only had a cursory look at the cost voting, but I thought that the cost voting functions all required stacks to actually participate in voting. Like we can't just call them inside the epoch, the epoch upgrade logic, can we?
Yeah, but like the epoch upgrade logic can do all sorts of funny business to the data maps and data variables in the cost voting contract. Like it doesn't need to call the public functions directly.
That's true. Oops. Keep clicking the wrong thing. Sorry about that. Oops. So yeah, those things we have the inbound upgrades, extension contracts, epoch switches, and reliability improvements. These basically map one-to-one onto the document that we talked about last week. So I intend to, I guess maybe the only big change is that I kind of intend to solve 1805 in part by just making it so that the anchor block selection logic will require that the anchor block is also the maximum BTC weight block, or it's just not chosen. That would be a consensus breaking change, but it would make it a lot simpler to deal with 1805. Are there any particular issues or questions about the 2.1 issues?
What's your take on having maybe like starting this epoch refactoring with maybe like introducing like a high level API at the Clarity in the Clarity VM, so that we can start working on the Clarity changes.
I'm not sure I understand the question. What kind of API?
So I don't really know at this point how this epoch is going to impact the VM. Like it's unclear, but I'm just wondering if there's a way to mock this this new integration, and like even if it's not working today, at least we have like a way to introduce new functions. And
Would it be similar to like a pragma directive or like the equivalent in, I think, Solidity to like pin versions for contracts, or is it more about, you know, a new language feature is only available in like this version of the blockchain? Basically, what I heard, Ludo, is like you're looking for a way for us to start adding Clarity features that we know should only be available after this epoch switch, without waiting for that mechanism to be finalized. So
per discussions we've had earlier, the way in which we're adding new Clarity features is through these extension contracts. So the Clarity VM would treat them just like any other contract call. It's just that what we would have to add in a gated fashion is make it so that at the contract call site, we determine A, is the contract called calling one of these special extension contracts, and B, if so, use this native implementation instead. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I think that's true, and that we can maybe revisit like having a pragma in the future, like if we want to have actual language features. But what I think I heard Ludo asking about is, were you asking more about the actual implementation of this epoch switch, like what we can expect to like be provided at the Clarity module level in order to implement those changes?
Yeah. I think at this point it's I just don't know what are the changes that we are going to introduce at the VM level. So is it like you said, Jude, at runtime, or is it maybe at deploy time when we are doing the analysis?
If we can help it, I think we should try to avoid changing the analysis behavior across the epoch boundary, just in a bid to reduce the number of total places that we have to change clarity behavior based on what epoch is currently active. That's the problem extension contracts solve, because the clarity analysis pass works the same either way. It types checks the contract and verifies the contract calls all have the right types. But at runtime, you add the new functionality into the extension contract. And also at runtime, we make it so that the extension contracts only materialize at the 2.1 epoch switch, so that there's no way a current contract could ever invoke an extension contract in the 2.0 epoch.
Okay.
But I guess maybe to ask directly, Luda, are you like looking for almost like a API that the VM would consume?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even
And like
if we
given
mock,
that AI or API, you could get started on some of these extension contracts.
yeah.
Yeah.
And we can mock the operations being done by this API.
Yeah.
We can just default to.
Yeah, I think that should be doable.
Yeah, you don't have to wait on the epoch switch logic to start working on the extension contract interfaces and implementations.
Yeah. I can draw up an API. I think there's basically like two points of interface. So one is like when you have a new block in the epoch, this method will get called. Like when you cross the epoch boundary, this method will be called. And that's like a method in the VM. Like the VM is getting invoked to just do some stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other method is like a method on the sortition DB that's like, what epoch am I in? Yeah.
I kind of feel like that first thing is going to be a lot like the boot code. Like when we process a stacks block whose parent is in the 2.0 epoch, but that lives in the 2.1 epoch, we would run the special function that creates like a clarity block connection, and it runs through the code that instantiates all of these new smart contracts and the extension contracts.
Yeah.
But that doesn't have to happen. But the existence of that system is not blocking on the implementation of the extension contracts.
Right, that's true. But like to test the implementation of the extension contracts, like you need to kind of know how you're going to get invoked, like how it's going to get instantiated.
But that's the thing, though. You could set up the Clarity VM so that the extension contracts get materialized in the test framework.
Yeah.
So that because what the extension contract basically does is like the special case handling code for the extension contract implementation can't get invoked if the analysis pass doesn't know about the entry point to it. So as long as those extension contracts don't exist, then we don't have to even worry about gating access to the inner implementation because it's already unreachable.
Yeah.
The extension contract itself would probably live under the SP00000, et cetera address. So nobody could come along and instantiate the extension contract. Or maybe that address could be something that's mockable so that we could test this out. Like you could deploy the extension contract yourself and then it's a different address, sure, but you could at least verify that now that the extension contract entry point exists, the analysis pass will run and the special contract call handling functions will get invoked.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm just imagining that there's like going to be a function either in the VM module or maybe in the chain state module that's like initiate 2.1 state.
Yeah.
Wherever it gets invoked, whatever, like we can figure that out down the line. But like in there is where we would add functionality to actually instantiate the extension contracts and stuff.
Yeah, I could imagine like next to the boot directory, there'd be like a 2.1 directory that contains all the extension contract clarity code that the chain state would just go ahead and load up and instantiate, much like how it does with the boot code right now.
Yeah, I don't know. Ludo, is this making things more clear or less clear?
More clear, yeah.
Okay, good.
Thanks.
Are there other questions, comments, or concerns on the 2.1 upgrade?
Aaron, I think you had mentioned that you were putting together a doc like describing the upgrade mechanics, or if maybe I'm misremembering.
Yeah,
Go
I have like a doc with like a little bit of an explanation of the POX upgrade mechanics and like the consequences of it. And I was going to just add that to, there's like a discussion topic for POX 2.1. I was just going to add that content there.
Yeah, that's fine. I think maybe like one way, I guess like what I'm getting at is for any like significant thing that we're doing for Stacks 2.1, it'd be good to like create or start like producing an actual, design documents for these things, both so that, we have sort of material that other people can poke at, but then, when it comes time to write the actual SIP, it would be fairly straightforward if, all of this exists. And then, it'll give us an opportunity to kind of front load some of the discussions or how, different features or work streams might interact. So hopefully we can discover some things that we would otherwise discover later in the process. So maybe like one tangible thing to do is for any major, we can identify like, the handful of really major mechanisms that are coming in Stacks 2.1, and we give ourselves some date by which we want to have, at least a draft of the design up for review somewhere.
Aaron, you're going to put this on the StacksGov discussion, right?
It was going to go in the Stacks blockchain discussion, but I guess there's maybe two different topics here. So like one is just like a description of the epoch switching mechanism itself, and then the other is like a description of like the 2.1 upgrade mechanism. They're slightly different, but we can include both of them in the same design document and just try to flesh it out. I don't know.
Yeah, and in terms of which repository stuff should go in, I think things that are very specific to the implementation, like the Rust implementation of the blockchain, like they should go in the Stacks blockchain discussions. I think things that are maybe more protocol agnostic or protocol related that potentially could be applicable to any other implementation should one were to exist. SIPs obviously being one of them. Those are maybe fine or better preferred to go on the StacksGov repository.
Alrighty, that makes sense. Aaron, if you want to take a stab at that, I can add follow-up comments and clarifications for how bits and pieces work inside the sortition DB, for example, or inside the chain state DB. Up to you.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll take a stab at it. Yeah, I guess we'll use the discussion topic for this. Like, it feels like it could also be something we used like a wiki for.
Yeah. I think the wikis don't make for good like comment resolution.
I see.
So if we anticipate an actual discussion happening, we should probably just use the discussions.
Yeah, makes sense.
All right.
Is there anything else?
Not from me.
Everyone know what they're working on? All right. go ahead and stop sharing. And stop recording.